I'm up.
Hi, this is Sid. I'm CEO and co-founder at GitLab. And today we're going to talk about remote work and its biggest challenges. Joining me is Leo. Leo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Sid. Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Leo. I'm the co-founder of Buffer. I've recently stepped away from that and lived in a Buddhist monastery for a couple of years and have since transitioned into being an executive coach. That's what I'm doing full time today.
Cool. Leo, I think you set the subject matter for this call. You want to kick it off with a question?
Sure. Actually, before we kick it off, I'm just curious if you would be open to something that helps me a lot before we get into it, just to do a very informal, call it a weather check-in. It's kind of like just to see where you and I and everyone in the call maybe is at, kind of emotionally, and kind of inspired by that from your background of seeing the weather in Cape Town. How do you feel about that, Sid?
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool. I can kick it off so I can model it, and then everyone can join in and share what's going on for them. That seem good?
Yep.
Um, I'd say that I feel very similar to the background of your cloudy, but also lots of blue sky. So there's some cloudiness inside of me, some nervousness. I had a couple of big meetings last few days, but also kind of a sky and a kind of a hopefulness for the connection of this call. So that's a little bit what's going on for me.
Cool. I'm grateful for yesterday. We went sailing yesterday, and that's always beautiful on the bay. I'm also a bit anxious, or yeah, a bit anxious. There was some negative news, which was just relayed, and it's not nobody did anything wrong, but sometimes things happen that are just not great, and it's an urgent and an important situation. I think I handled it well, but I just sent off an email to the board within half an hour of handling it, and it's, you always kind of wonder, okay, did I make the right calls? Did I propose the right path out of there? So what do other people agree that's the right path forward? So we're gonna find out about that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, Betsy, are you willing to share?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, when you were describing how you were feeling, Leo, I'm kind of in a similar place today. I am, feeling generally good about things, but I've got so much going on in my life right now, work, personal, everything, and it's all good stuff, but definitely overwhelming to kind of have all of that happening at once. So a little bit of cloudiness, but nothing stormy.
Mhm. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go next. I feel refreshed. I think last weekend was a good weekend where I got to not focus on too much of work and kind of just enjoy the moment. And so I'm definitely grateful for that. And now that it's Monday, I'm also a little bit anxious because now I have quite a bit of work to catch up on. So regardless, I think overall I'm pretty optimistic of the week regardless.
Thanks for sharing.
And I'll go to round it up, but I'll compare myself to San Francisco and how it's foggy at first, and then it clears up, and so that's how I feel. I'm very excited though because I've starting the shadow program this week, joining Sid, Mayak, and part of this. So very excited, but a lot of the openness makes a lot of opportunity. That's what I'll relate it to.
Thanks so much, everyone. I notice there's a deeper breath coming from me. That's always like a sign that I'm settling in a little more. And yeah, I would love to kick it off. I put a few questions out there, and I would love to start just right off the bat. Sid, can you share with me just what are your maybe your three biggest challenges when it comes to remote work today? Maybe not a story that you tell everyone all the time, but just kind of right now, if you think about it.
Well, very much today. I think 1.5 hours ago, I had a call with Emily from our data team, and we were talking about where should definitions live So we have a lot of metrics and KPIs we're tracking in GitLab. Where should those definitions live? And there's a continual natural urge to have things tidy, as in have one page with all our courses, have one page with all our metrics, have one page with all our abbreviations. But time and time again, we discover that that's unmanageable, and things should live where they are needed, not based on the format they are. So that's to organize it that way is a continual struggle, because it's not the tidy thing. It's the thing that things that are used together should live together, irrespective of whether they're a video or a definition or a scribbling or a drawing or whatever they are. Another thing is that's super hard is like handbook first. People keep announcing things in the form of PowerPoints, in the form of newsletters, in the all kinds of forms, except the format that we use and that we know that can scale. And yeah, so those are two things that come to mind that are very recent.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated. Are you open if I go a little deeper into that, because I have this sense that there's actually even like a bigger story behind that. I think it reminds me a lot of my kind of remote work company leader days. Are you open to a follow-up question on this?
I believe in permissionless interviews.
Okay, great. So what I'm hearing there is like kind of this challenge between, is it like the fluidity of like just letting things roll and letting them kind of happen as they might, versus the kind of the fixity, but that's sometimes necessary to scale. Is that like a general challenge you would describe? I
think that a lot of things are unnatural about remote work. I think working asynchronous, and I think writing things down and building kind of this knowledge base of the entire company is a very unnatural thing. It's not the natural state of things. If it was intuitive, every country would have it. Every company would have it. So I think every single company I've ever been at, there was an attempt at a knowledge base. And every single organization I joined, also, that was out of date. It wasn't used in practice. It was some outdated stuff. It was a paper truth, not what people used in their real day-to-day. So I think it's absolutely necessary for remote work. Basically, every company needs it. But if you're all together in an office, the cost of missing a piece of information is smaller, because at least you're in the same time zone and you can just ask someone. As you get spread across time zones, I think it's much more important that you don't need that back and forth. And then it becomes essential that everything is in there. And that only happens if it's there first. That's the central place. That's how you communicate. That's how you are organized. And it's not some documentation after the fact. And we found other things that are not the natural state of things. We do breakout calls every day, and we talk about our life outside of work. And to organize that at the company level is kind of artificial. But if you don't do it artificially, it doesn't happen. And it's still important that people build up a connection outside of work.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a great opening for me to go into too. Like, what is that kind of artificialness that you have to bring in, right? On the one hand, for the organizational level, for, where does the data live? Where does the handbook live? And I'm also kind of curious what you've kind of started to talk about more, like from a connection level, right? How do people stay connected? I remember that was one of my biggest challenges at Buffer, which is like, I felt really often just lonely. And, even the breakout calls, sometimes, I wasn't in the mood to talk about my feelings right then when they were scheduled, or like, and there wasn't kind of the serendipity that was flowing in that way. can you speak to how that's been coming up even for you personally at GitLab more?
Yeah, look, you gotta take where if you are co-located, you waste a lot of time on the commute. But the nice thing is that the social bonding is kind of more naturally occurring. At GitLab, we save time on the commute, but we have to spend time or like designate time for these social things. Otherwise, they don't happen. And we do that in many ways. Apart from the breakout calls, we also have people do coffee chats where they just schedule half an hour with each other just to chat, nothing else, no agenda. We have our contribute things, the picture behind me, where every 9 months we go away for a week together. But we also encourage people to visit each other. We have a travel stipend if you visit other people. We do like regional meetups where you can meet other people from GitLab. And anytime we do come together, we, for example, for a trade fair, we schedule in some time to just with the group, not with customers or the work we're out there to do. And for example, Mayank was talking about his relaxed weekend. I was talking about mine, but it was the same. Like we were on Sunday, we went sailing together. So I now feel bad for not inviting Ty. Ty, I'm not sure you were in town, but if so, I'm sorry. But yeah, we do take time to get to know each other and hang out outside of the structure of a planned meeting with an agenda.
Yeah. I'm curious, Betsy, can you speak to that too? I'm curious, I think, what's your experience of that?
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting because one of the things we often talk about is that there's a huge difference in there being, a few or even a large group of remote people when there is still a headquarters with a company. And that's the experience that I came from. I worked in a large office for about 6 years before I became a remote employee for that same company. And I did it for about 6 months before I realized that you always feel like you're that, kind of outsider in the group and that you're really kind of being deprived of some of the things that other people have the opportunity to do. So that, was one of the biggest things that really appealed to me about GitLab because everyone's so on the same playing field. So for me, it's been such a breath of fresh air. I started about 3 months ago, so I'm still relatively new as far as, being completely remote. But, I think a lot of the ways that we intentionally try to develop some of these social interactions then kind of lend themselves to more informal interactions. Which is nice. I've one of my first breakout calls, I met a fellow new hire who I've now continued to have coffee chats with, and it's been a great kind of one-on-one relationship that was built out of something a little bit more artificial in the beginning. So, I certainly think that we talk a lot about how it has to be the right fit for that person. But I think, for me, I've experienced such a better balance of kind of all of those things being in an all remote company.
Right. And what continues to stay hard?
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Say that one more time.
What is that for you that's still hard now, even though?
Yeah. So I think, probably just trying to continue to, stay connected to what everyone's doing and really commit. I think it's a two-way street. So GitLab as a company really makes opportunities for all of us to connect but it has to be kind of, the responsibility is also on us to participate in that. So I have to remind myself that when I do participate in the breakout calls, I always feel better afterwards because I've had a conversation or laughed about something with someone. And so I think that's my biggest challenge, is continuing to stay connected and take advantage of those things. And, not just have a conversation with my dog every morning and call it a day. So it's definitely an intentional, decision that you have to make every day. So that's probably my biggest ongoing challenge. But, even GitLab being able to pay for you to join a co-working space is really helpful and encourages me to kind of go connect with other people that may not even work for GitLab.
I want to throw it back onto the kind of just the artificial elements. One of the things we found at Buffer, I remember, is because it has like a sort of an artificial nature and it's not like serendipitous, some people, and I include myself as one of those people, after a while, it's like, actually, I just want to get my stuff done, right? I just want to do my things. And, these calls, they're nice, but, what does that really bring me in terms of, and I'm amazed, Betsy, hearing you speak about, I know I feel better, the awareness you have, like, oh, I feel better in my body if I have these calls. And I'm just curious, maybe throwing it back to you, Sid, like, have you noticed any pull towards kind of the productivity that pulls people out of creating a social context, and how do you kind of incentivize, or how do people stay motivated to keep going into those social spaces without an agenda?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think we've seen attendance drop for the breakout calls. So right now it seems that they're failing. And as a percent, the company is growing, so the numbers kind of are going up. But as a percentage of the company, fewer people are participating in group conversations as well. So,
why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's something to what you said, like it's artificial. It's maybe not on the right time, or it's maybe not with the people you selected. So we even rotate every 2 months. We rotate, half the group gets put together from another group, so you see new people. But imagine at a company, you'd hang out with the same people for year over year over year. There wouldn't be a lot of rotation. So maybe that's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Any comments from? Maybe we can just clarify. Is there the intention that Mayang and Tai share too, or when I hear shadowing, I'm having my assumptions in mind, but I'm maybe asking a stupid question here. Are you guys hoping to not speak?
I don't mind speaking. I mean, more than happy to. If there's any particular question, I can help answer and provide context to. But I presume Sid's feedback and Betsy's feedback would be enough, because I don't want to have too many cooks in the room providing information. So happy to answer if there's any particular question.
Yeah. I think part of me wants to stay on that for a little longer, because we've never fully figured that out, and kind of just the loneliness that develops on some level. And even what you said, Betsy, like the co-working thing, I never found that to be like a real answer either. I found that like there's someone from Product Hunt suggested that what they think is a good idea is to make small offices with random people in wherever you live, so that you actually have this cohesion. You kind of have a sort of a social investment with the other person, versus, and some of my background now is I've also trained as a therapist. There's like, when you just walk up to the barista, just walk up to a random person every day in the morning, and you have a little bit of chit chat, your social engagement system, the thing that makes you feel alive and connected, and you have friends, isn't really getting triggered so much when we do that. Kind of similar to what Sid said, when you rotate often, the human nervous system doesn't really get the level of engagement on that level. And I don't have the answer either. Like, a part of me is walking into this without having a conclusion of like how this is solved. But yeah, I wonder if there's anything else that comes up for you just hearing me explain that, Sid.
Yeah, I think many times the initial trigger to participate in social events is because we'll be missed if we're not there. And I think as soon as you lose that, like, hey, where were you? I think it gets harder. There's so much things to do. You could also spend the time that you're otherwise in the breakout call watching Netflix, or doing other things, or getting some work done. You have more time in the evening to watch Netflix. So, or I've been watching a lot of Facebook video about engineering things lately. So we're competing with that. And I think it's what Betsy said resonated. Like, it's a thing that makes you feel good, but the reward is a bit less pronounced than the sugar high you get from some other things.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to say it's for your own good.
Right.
But
yeah.
we had a week where we said, okay, this week everyone please participate in the breakout calls, and that got attendance up, and that effect that lasted for a while, where people thought, okay, I really like this, and they got on with it. So maybe, for example, we can make, as soon as we switch groups, we make the first week mandatory, so that at least every group has a start, and then you see which groups last.
And that brings up one idea for me that worked for us a little bit more, which is kind of like topical social virtual get-togethers. I'm sure you've tried your fair share of that. Like, I remember we had like a talk show where someone would like kind of like Jimmy Fallon style, and those Zoom calls were packed, right? Or even kind of like meditation circles, or like things that had like some investment. There's an idea I heard someone say, it's like, what if we had a weekly kind of improv group on Zoom, where we played like some improv games, where you have a kind of a social reward that's kind of more pronounced than a kind of an open-ended make your own kind of thing. Is that something that's worked for you, or how does that resonate with you even hearing?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. We had people do the improv thing, like, give me a couple of words, I'll make music with it. We have someone who's really into ice hockey, and they kind of announced that on the group call. So we've had a few things in that direction, and that might be a good one to kind of take and make into kind of a weekly staple or something like that.
One of the calls that I found most engaging recently was actually just a social hour with my more immediate team. So there was not necessarily an agenda, but we sort of guided everyone by a few questions like, show us pictures and tell us about some of the most important people in your life, and things like that people value and would want the people who work most closely with them to kind of understand about them. And so we had really great participation from our team recently with that type of conversation, and it really helped everyone kind of get to know what's going on in each other's lives outside of work, but not necessarily talking about like a random prompt question, for example. So it seemed like people were much more engaged in sharing that kind of information and getting to know their immediate team well.
What I'm picking up there, which I think is so crucial, I almost feel like I want to go deeper into that, is that there is a kind of like a clearer social contract with the people in the group, right? It's like your immediate team. So there's immediately more investment and more, just from a tribal perspective, evolutionarily, it makes a lot more sense for me to really feel socially safe and connected and close with people that I'm dependent on survival, right? Now, I know that's a little far from, what is really happening, but that is interesting for me to explore that a little bit. Like, how do we create more team cohesion and connection based off of a group of people that already wants that, naturally on some level or another, versus random people that rotate or something like that. That's getting really interesting to me. Just hearing the way you describe that, even like I can see the joy that must have brought. Like, oh yeah, this person that usually just, yeah. I want to throw that back to Sid. What's that bringing up for you?
I think that's a good idea. I think we could make that a recommendation for team leads to designate one of the team calls in a slow week, designated to just hang out together. And say, I love the story, like the question, like, who the people are important in your life. So I think that sounds like a merge request.
I'm on it.
That sounds great. I want to kind of just, this is something that I really love to hear, kind of like, maybe for both of you, like, Sid, if you could like kind of look back on this call, like kind of in 12 months from now, and we did this again, we did this very call again, and you would actually open this call with saying, Leo, like, holy shit, things have changed completely in some aspects at GitLab where life is so much better. Things were great before, but now they've just become, I couldn't even imagine this was possible. Like, I'm just curious, what would be some of the things that you would tell me intuitively about what happened that made life at GitLab so much better?
Yeah, I think maybe I'm pigeonholing a bit too much, but if we can rescue the breakout calls, if attendance there's up to 80%, and we did it by making them one a week is about hobbies, another one is with your immediate team, one of them is kind of more talent style, so talk show, improv, singing, something, showing off your hobby projects. And that got us our attendance up. I think that would be a great outcome. And
why? Why would that matter to you?
Because I think everyone recognizes these social connections are important. And I think with attendance dropping, we're missing that. We're missing that as a company, and that's gonna lead to like disenfranchisement. I'm messing up the word, but people will not feel as connected to the company, and it's kind of a natural state of things as companies grow, that people feel less connected to it. But I think we should try very hard with everything that we've got to keep it. Also, we have a group conversation every day where one department kind of presents and others ask questions. So I think I've seen participation there drop, both as a percentage, but also people asking questions. So we can have more incentives there, like good questions get rewarded, or they have a quiz and you can participate in the quiz and you can win prizes, or things like that to kind of make it more fun. I think our user research team is pretty good. Sarah always does a quiz and prizes, and people like that. So that's another call that I would love to rescue.
And then when I have one follow-up question, this may be silly, Sid, but are you a part of the breakout calls?
Yeah, I participate in one too.
How do you feel?
It's easy to skip them. So I go to at least about half of them, because I'm the CEO. I should lead by example. But I think if I wasn't the CEO, I'd skip it because it's in half an hour. But you slightly feel worse and less connected. Like, I never regret participating in one afterwards. But when you see it on your agenda, you're like, I could also do this or that.
Something is interesting for me, and I feel a little uncomfortable going into that, but something about the pattern that you shared, because like I'm wondering, oh, well, if you as the CEO, you are having a mindset of like, oh, we should do that, right? Like that shoulding will kind of like stop people from wanting it, right? Like what would have to happen for you to like never skip a breakout call ever again? Would it have to be with your executive team as a social breakout call? What would be the shift that would make that happen for you?
Yeah, if it was with the executive team, I'd go more frequently, and this is a conscious choice. Like, there's a reason why we don't do it with your immediate team members. It would up attendance, but it would also mean that we as a company, we're organized functionally. So all the information silos are going to be between functions. So if you make this call, if you form all the social bonds within functions, the lack of empathy for other functions will only increase. So
why do you think that? I would challenge that. Why do you think that's true?
I think social connections help with kind of with communication, like and empathy. I think if you know someone in sales because you hang out with them, and then you suppose it's and you get a comment in an issue, you don't really like the comment, Like it's a bit terse. It's a bit not so nice. It's a bit pointing out a problem that really isn't a problem. I think if you know someone, if you know that person, you're going to interpret it much better. But even if you just know someone in that department, you're going to have more understanding. So I think it's very important for a company to kind of have this cross-pollination where people know each other across departments.
Betsy, do you have anything to throw in there?
I was just thinking, I agree. I think, like I said, I was excited about and really enjoyed the connection point with my immediate team that we had, but I also have had so many connections made in breakout calls. Even, there was one that I joined a couple weeks ago where it was just me and one other person who joined. And at first you kind of have this I'm the only one here with one other person. Do I really feel like doing this right now? But every time that's happened, I've either, heard their story, one person that was on my breakout call travels pretty much full time and works for GitLab. And so it was really cool to talk to her and realize that she has an awesome story to tell and we should be, talking about that. So not only was it a good social connection, but it helped with my job in the end. And so I think it is so important that we still make those connections outside of our own team, but figuring out where that, incentive is, I think is the question mark that we're all having.
Yeah. And I would add,
go
ahead, please.
Sometimes it's necessary to have meetings with different teams and cross-functional teams. Because if I only met with my immediate team, it would be basically a one-on-one with my boss. So smaller teams we get advantage of working with larger teams.
There's right. Yeah, that's another kind of boundary there. But if that's your team, right? Who's your tribe, right? Just two people is not enough, right? Yeah. And to me, this is a curious big picture. I always like bringing it to kind of a higher level. What I'm hearing from you, Sid, is something I definitely agree with. There's if we get too entrapped in our micro tribe, it becomes like an us versus them, right? That's what I'm hearing you say. And that's kind of like the silos, and there isn't kind of like the collaboration there anymore. And also from my experience though, and is that and that's where we disagree. That's where I'm a little more with Betsy's idea of the main team cohesion socially and productively, right? I think starts with the immediate team, and that's your micro tribe. And if there is true psychological safety, my understanding of both kind of the research is that trust and empathy for even teams outside of the closest tribe would in fact go up, because the team is so in tune with each other socially that they're naturally open and wanting to connect. Hey, how is sales doing? But I think the priority I would shift to if you start with the cross-pollination and you don't even have that really strong cohesion socially and productively, I think it's hard to cross that gap.
That's not what I've observed. We've had multiple teams in GitLab where there was a siege mentality, where the team felt under siege by the rest of the company. It's a fast-going startup, so there's enormous amounts of requests on teams. There's always way more work than you can handle. It's all about the tone, the leadership sets. And if you have teams that are very strong internally, but with weak leadership, you get this they're unrealistic. They're asking something unrealistic. Let them do it, but we know better. And that manifests itself in secret messaging channels, lots of DMing, an official planning and a real planning. Officially, we're going to do this, but in reality, we're going to do something else. And people saying, hey, I really love my team, but I don't like the company. And so this is not, I wanted to say this happens at Dunbar's number, 150 people, but we had it even before that. And it's always leadership who sets the tone. And I've added to our leadership principles like complain up and explain down. So weak leaders, they do the reverse. So they complain down, they complain about the rest of the organization, and they explain up why, making excuses for why their department can do what it should do. Should be the reverse. Up to your manager, you should be complaining. You should be like, I need this and this and this to happen for our team to be effective. You should be fighting for your team. But some weak leaders mistake that with saying to their team, yeah, you have all kinds of unreasonable demands being made, but just ignore it. We're doing great. We're fine. And all these weird requests, it doesn't make sense. No, you should be explaining the company policy, even if you disagree with it. We call disagree, commit, and disagree. You have to commit and explain that. There's no, I made that mistake too. The board wants XYZ. No, it's not the board wants. The company needs XYZ. And if I disagree, that's fine. I disagree with the board. I all I want. But if in the end I accept that, I should execute it. So it's not a hypothetical thing. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have a strong connection with the rest of your team. As I said before in this call, I encourage Betsy to make this a merge request to our handbook to have these team calls, but certainly not at the expense of creating cross-company understanding.
Right. And that's, I think I'm fully with you there. And when you say, just to clarify, when you say leadership, is that the leadership of the, like, what are we talking about? Are we talking like C-level or like?
The leadership of that team can be anything from a team lead to C-level person.
Right. Which then to me sounds almost like a whole separate thing, right? Like if you say like leadership is weak, that's a whole other challenge in that way.
Yep.
Yeah. Makes sense. Cool. I find this fascinating and I'm really, really curious. Like I love that kind of the place of like how does the whole company connect and how do individual teams kind of feel more coherent? I'd love to hear how that went, if you can rescue the calls or what you need to do to make those work. I think one thing I'm curious about is like when it comes to remote work, is there such a thing as a kind of like a characteristic of the people that join that's important? And I understand that opens us up to all sorts of bias problems, right? Where we now project onto people, but is there something like a remote worker?
What we say in our documentation, we need managers of one. So people who can manage their own time effectively. You're going to have less input from your manager. They're not going to be as aware of your hour by hour. So you need to be able to prioritize effectively yourself.
How do you figure that out?
It's a hard thing to find out, but there's questions you can ask. I'm not sure, Betsy, whether you have a great answer there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of our like interview process covers your typical kind of behavioral questions, which really get at how someone's handled an experience in the past. So it's not just, would you enjoy working remotely? Yes or no. It's asking, how you've actually handled a situation where you were either working on your own on something or worked remotely in the past. So I think getting down in an interview into those examples that predicts kind of future behavior will help with that. And, I think as far as there being like one type of person, I feel like we have such a mix of personalities from team to team and certainly across the company. I think it's easy to like, there are assumptions that people make like, oh, remote work is good for someone who's an introvert, but like I personally categorize myself as an extrovert and I really enjoy working remote. So I think it depends more on your work style, like Sid said, you know, whether you're comfortable with being kind of a self-starter and managing your own time, and if that's something that you thrive in or not.
Mm. Do you have a tendency to pick people that like have worked remotely before, or is there generally the new people starting at GitLab? Is there like, what's the spread of that? I'm curious.
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I think in my experience, just within 3 months, so it's not long. I've seen a mix. I think it's certainly easy to say that someone who's worked remotely in the past would be kind of an easy transition, you know, more so than someone who has to get used to that new environment. But, you know, I don't think that would necessarily rule someone out if they're interested in trying.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. To me, it also brings me back to this equation. When I hear you both say, like, talk about a self-starter, talk about somebody who kind of knows how to manage themselves first and foremost, right? Like for me, that becomes not just a productivity question, but also like mainly an emotional question, right? How do you manage your own emotional state on a day-to-day basis? And something I'm very interested in, like when it comes to remote work, is like, how do you foster more emotional resilience for the people once they join, once the company grows, right? Things get more crazy, which is more like of a softer encouragement. I'm curious, have you thought about that? How to support people on that more kind of psychological, emotional level to be more equipped with this wonderful new way, but also kind of Wild West way of working, of like the Wild West of like, there's not much rules, right? Like we're kind of making it up as we go along.
Was that to Betsy or me?
Yeah, maybe Sid. I'd love to hear from you on that kind of like more emotional aspect of development or support for people.
Yeah, I don't think I have a great answer. It's also people to handle that differently. Like we want kind of neurodiversity. We want people that, we want introverts and extroverts. Everyone handles things differently. I think a few guidelines we give is like criticism. If you dole it out, like make it about the work. If you receive it, make sure you realize it's about your work, not necessarily about you. And we do a lot of things to make sure that people feel, for example, heard. I had this call today with Emily, which we discussed briefly before, but about where to put our metrics. And we recently added to the handbook, like if you have a back and forth about something, make sure you start by wording the standpoint that the other person is advocating for as well as you possibly can. And I try to start with that. And I think it really helped. So I'm going to try to live that guideline. So we have some guidelines especially in on our leadership page that try to help with these things. But I don't think we want to go much deeper than that. It is a work context. We're not a retreat. We don't want to go there where we take on that responsibility or tell you how to deal with that.
That makes sense. You're kind of like drawing the line of like, hey, you're a little bit responsible for your emotional, psychological state, right?
Yeah, we want to help every way we can. We at one point, I think we had a program where we paid for a meditation app if you wanted to use it, etc. But I think that's it's a pretty fine line to walk.
Mm-hmm. What's your take on that, Betsy? Do you have any more comments here?
I would echo what Sid said. I mean, with his experience in this over the years, I think being a new team member, I've noticed that, you know, I feel like people are certainly like as they're onboarding you, they're very clear about the ways that we kind of try to balance work and life and maintain that healthy balance. And, you know, while certainly not everyone in the company does that, that's the case with every company, it's at least, you know, it's intentionally like brought to life, I guess, in your onboarding that you want to be focusing on, you know, staying mentally and physically healthy. And like there's something on the all remote page that talks about that, about the importance of like wellness. And so I think that kind of plays a role in it, is that the onus is really on you to figure out what that looks like in your life, but that it's important to the company that you feel that way and therefore are remaining engaged and a productive team member.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm kind of pondering that too, like how much support can you offer? How much support can you give? Been thinking about this idea, what is startups, or especially remote startups, should have a resident stress therapist, which I'm guessing Sid is very much against what you're saying. You're saying, that's way too far. We don't want to go there. Would that be true for you?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea, but you want to see where it crosses the line into like mental health. For some of our team members, we pay for healthcare and want to make sure that the healthcare is accessible to them, and they can get that when they need. Mental health is an important part of what we want to provide as an employer, but it's a very tricky thing, not least of like the responsibilities you take on. Like suppose you do that, you offer that as a service and it didn't work out, and there's a problem with the service you provided as a company. Now you're responsible for that, and that could end up being a huge responsibility to the company. So I think you want to, where do you draw the line? We're not equipped as a company to be providing mental health services. So I don't think we want to be in that business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And for me, like when I think of mental health, like more, and this is, bear with me on this a little bit, Sid, like I've lived in a monastery for 2 years. So I just mainly spent time just meditating, being with my inner world, trying to figure out, you know, what's a match here also for coming back, you know, now engaging more with businesses, right? And on some level, I think every question, every interaction, and I get there is a legal guideline here about mental health, but everything has to do with our emotional state. Every human-to-human interaction on some level is about, you know, we talked about empathy. We talked about how do I give feedback in a way that can all affect us. What if I'm under siege, right, from a whole different department? What kind of mental pressure does that bring me under, right? And so a part of me is curious to open it up a little bit. Like, for sure, there's lots of risks, and yet to get to the core of our humanity in some ways, there's some risk, I think, that needs to be taken for a great reward of like a team that operates on a level of, but yeah, maybe Betsy, maybe throwing that to you, and maybe Sid too. I wonder if you have a comeback on this one.
Yeah, so I think normally in the like non-medical sense, you just call it coaching, and you're in that business, and it's okay for the company to offer coaching, and we regularly provide that to employees. And at a certain seniority, it's much more common. So I do believe in that. I think that's the kind of the light way to provide it. Betsy?
Yeah, I think there are other things too that we have kind of built in that are not necessarily what you might immediately think of as something that contributes to, you know, mental health or empathy building or things like that. But even something like, we have a channel on Slack that's called Thanks, and it's just people, I mean, it's used multiple times a day, and people are sending out messages thanking, you know, even just a coworker on their team where I might not have known that these two people even work together or who they are, but it was great to see them thanking someone else for, you know, you name it, whether it was covering when they had to go out of the office last minute, or just showing them how to do something. It's really nice to like even if you don't even know what that is, it feels good and kind of like builds like a sense of like, this is a helpful, supportive community. And makes you more likely to reach out for help or to thank someone else and kind of like continue that feedback loop. So, that's something that came to mind when I was listening to you all talk about it. I think there's other things that we build in and could continue to build in that contribute in that way without it being like a formal program, that feels rigid.
I love that. I love that. This is actually a nice reminder for me, Betsy, to hear you say that, which is, I know we only have a few minutes left, right, before we wrap up. So.
Yeah, that's the end time was 10:50, so we're 7 minutes over right now.
Oh, you're 7. Oh, I see. I wonder, how would you all feel if we just go around, like everyone's sharing just one thing they're grateful for to kind of like make it concrete, what Betsy suggested there in terms of, what's one thing to end on a note where we feel gratitude to bring sort of in the next thing everyone is going after. How would that feel doing real quick?
Sounds good.
Do we have time for that, Sid, or do you need to call it?
Yeah. 2 minutes.
All right. I can kick it off. I feel grateful for, I feel really grateful for your honesty, especially Sid, for you to share in, I think the part about the kind of breakout calls and wanting to rescue them and seeing how that would be really valuable to you. I think that made me feel the most connected and feeling like, oh, there's something, about, human connection that would be really valuable that I'm sharing just ideologically and very much on the same level. So thanks for that.
Cool. Thanks, Leo. I'm grateful for the kind of the 4 different things we can do to improve the breakout calls and the company calls and the group team calls. That's an awesome result. Betsy?
Yeah, I'm grateful for just being part of this conversation. I think it's really interesting to hear different perspectives, and especially, from Sid's perspective, having been doing this for so long, and Leo, yours from having, been in the similar environment and then going off into a very different environment for a couple of years. So it's just, it reminds me why I'm appreciative of our work style, to be able to kind of talk through some of these things.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.
Bye, Leo.